"Oh God, not again," whispered one of the operators at Oahu's Women's Air Raid Defense. It was the early hours of March 4th, 1942, and the women stared at their screens in dismay. Unidentified long-range aircraft were approaching Pearl Harbor. Operators urgently sent out warnings, and American fighters were scrambled. But radar malfunctions and worsening weather left the interceptors blind. Radar officers could only watch helplessly, realizing the enemy had slipped through the defensive perimeter. Concealed by storm clouds, two Japanese flying boats advanced steadily and with confidence. Only a couple of months had passed since the most devastating attack on a U.S. military base in history. No one was ready for another one. December 7th, 1941, had been a day of unforgettable destruction. That morning, the rising sun reflected off the bodies of Imperial Japanese Navy aircraft as the first wave of 183 bombers and fighters sliced through the calm skies. 6 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, had crossed 3,500 miles of ocean in total radio silence. Leading them was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the bold strike. He aimed to cripple the United States Pacific Fleet before it could even respond. A Harvard-educated strategist, Yamamoto knew Japan could not match America's industrial strength, but he hoped a shocking blow might force the U.S. into a negotiated peace. At 7:48 a.m., torpedoes ripped through the harbor, equipped with wooden fins to work in the shallow water. Dive bombers plunged from the sky, unleashing fire and metal. Fighters strafed airfields, tearing through hangars and anti-aircraft positions. Hickam, Wheeler, and Bellows airfields were devastated in minutes. American planes lined up wingtip to wingtip were easy targets. By the time the attack ended, 188 aircraft were destroyed, with another 159 too damaged to repair. The assault reached Battleship Row. The USS Arizona exploded with a catastrophic blast, killing 1,177 crew members instantly. Nearby, the USS Oklahoma was hit by multiple torpedoes and capsized, trapping hundreds of sailors below. The harbor was coated in burning oil and debris as survivors leapt into the water. Despite the enormous damage, the Japanese failed to hit some of the most vital targets. The oil depots, repair yards, and submarine docks remained intact. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, leading the strike, pulled his fleet back after just 2 waves, fearing a counterattack. In Washington, the shock of the attack shattered America's isolationist stance. Until that moment, groups like the America First Committee, led by Charles Lindbergh, had worked to keep the U.S. out of foreign wars. That ended in a matter of hours. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress. And with only one dissenting vote, the U.S. declared war on Japan, launching itself into the global conflict. In Tokyo, Japanese leaders reviewed the aftermath with caution. Yamamoto understood the problem. The Pacific Fleet wasn't destroyed, just wounded. Analysts studied reconnaissance photos and intercepted communications that suggested the unthinkable. The Americans were rebuilding faster than expected. The USS West Virginia, believed lost, was being refloated. The USS California and USS Nevada were being raised and repaired. Welders worked non-stop. Pearl Harbor was no longer a graveyard, but a forge. By January 1942, scouts reported several battleships back in dry dock. Yamamoto was furious. His entire plan relied on crushing the fleet before the U.S. could react. The Japanese Empire pushed forward, trying to capitalize on its temporary edge, seizing Guam, Wake Island, the Philippines, and even the Aleutians. But it was clear another strike was necessary. Operation Keisakusen, meaning Operation Strategy, was Japan's answer to America's unexpected resilience. Personally endorsed by Yamamoto, the plan aimed to assess the damage at Pearl Harbor, and if possible, halt the recovery. More than a reconnaissance mission, it was designed to terrorize the population and disrupt rebuilding efforts. The main target was the 1010 dock, a massive repair facility essential for restoring large ships. Destroying it would force damaged vessels to return to California for repairs, greatly weakening American presence in the Pacific. The Japanese also hoped to hit other infrastructure that had survived the initial attack, further shaking U.S. morale. The mission would also be the combat debut of the Kawanishi H8K flying boat, nicknamed Emily by Allied forces. The H8K was an enormous aircraft, 92 feet long, with a 124-foot wingspan. Despite its size, it could reach speeds near 290 miles per hour and was heavily armed with cannons and machine guns. It could carry either 4,400 pounds of bombs or two 1,800-pound torpedoes. Though it had performed well in tests, the aircraft had never seen combat. Operation K would change that. Yamamoto requested 5 Emilys for the operation, but only 2 were available due to production and logistical issues. The mission was scheduled for March 4, 1942, to coincide with a full moon for better visibility. The aircraft would fly 1,900 miles from the Marshall Islands with no fighter escort, relying on darkness and stealth. They planned to refuel at French frigate Shoals, a remote atoll 310 miles from Oahu, where they expected to meet submarine Warren 23. Strict radio silence was enforced. When I-23 stopped communicating on February 14th, its disappearance wasn't immediately recognized as a major problem. Even without confirmation of the submarine's status, the mission went ahead. The 2 chosen pilots came from the elite 801 Kokutai Fighter Squadron, known for its discipline, skill, and loyalty. On March 3, 1942, they flew from Jaluit Atoll to WWII Atoll, where 8 550-pound bombs awaited. Before taking off, the pilots took a moment of reflection. Hashizume held a family amulet. Sasao offered a silent prayer. Then they boarded their aircraft and took off toward the French frigate Shoals. Meanwhile, American intelligence was watching closely. Codebreakers at Pearl Harbor, led by Captain Joseph J. Rochefort, intercepted Japanese messages and sent warnings to Hawaii. But local authorities dismissed the alert as unlikely and chose not to take major action. With no reports of aircraft carriers in the area, American military leaders were convinced that such a long-range bombing mission was beyond Japan's capabilities. As night fell over the Pacific, Hashizume and Sasao continued their journey to the French frigate Shoals. They arrived after dark and landed smoothly on the calm waters of the lagoon. While refueling, they wondered about the absence of submarine 23, which was meant to provide them with final intelligence and assist with the operation. With no sign of the submarine, they resumed their mission and took off again, climbing toward cruising altitude. Their next target was Oahu, over 300 miles away. As they entered U.S. territorial airspace, they encountered an unexpected problem. The skies, expected to be clear under the full moon, quickly filled with thick clouds and fog rolling in from the northeast. Visibility dropped so drastically that they had to rely entirely on their instruments. Among the 23's planned duties was the delivery of updated weather reports to help the pilots avoid such conditions. Without that support, they were flying blind into worsening weather. At this critical moment, the Women's Air Raid Defense Radar Station on Oahu picked up unusual signals. Alarms were sounded, and fighter planes and patrol bombers were launched. But the storm worked against the defenders as well. The thick clouds and rain made it nearly impossible for American pilots to locate the intruders. Scanning the sky in vain, they failed to spot the incoming aircraft. By 2 a.m., both Japanese planes crossed into Oahu's airspace undetected. The weather continued to disorient Hashizume and Sasao. Peering through their cockpit windows, they could see only shadows and indistinct landforms. They couldn't identify Pearl Harbor or any familiar landmarks. American personnel on the ground, still shaken from the December attack, feared the worst. Captain Joseph J. Rochefort, leading the Navy's code-breaking efforts in Hawaii, had already warned of the possibility of another strike, further increasing tension among defenders. Above the island, the Japanese pilots were losing their bearings. Dense clouds swirled around them, reducing visibility to a few meters. Hashizume struggled to stay close to Sasao, but their plan for a coordinated strike was unraveling. Breaking radio silence, Hashizume called out a new heading, instructing Sasao to fly north toward Pearl Harbor. There was no reply. He repeated the message, now with frustration in his voice, but only static answered. Whether due to equipment failure or interference from the storm, the 2 aircraft became separated. Sasao, now on his own, chose to turn south, hoping for clearer skies. Without coordination, the 2 planes approached Oahu from different directions, disoriented and uncertain. Below them, a blackout left the island in darkness. Civilians remained indoors, their windows sealed, radios offering updates and warnings. The same precautions that shielded the population made it almost impossible for the pilots to find their targets. Hashizume, struggling with wind and turbulence, thought he saw the outline of a military installation. Under pressure, he released his bombs. They exploded on the forested slopes of Tantalus Peak, not far from Roosevelt High School. The blasts left craters but caused no casualties or structural damage, though they terrified nearby residents. On the opposite side of the island, Sasao was even more lost. His fuel was nearly gone. Unsure of his position, he dropped his bombs into the sea off WWII. The explosions went unnoticed except by a few fishermen who saw flashes in the dark. Both pilots, now fully aware of their vulnerable position, turned back toward the Marshall Islands. The mission that was meant to deliver a crippling blow had turned into a retreat. Sasao, short on fuel and rattled by the failure, was the first to land safely at WWII Atoll. He was met by ground crews and quietly exited his aircraft, already anticipating the disappointment of his superiors. He had returned with no victory, just accounts of stormy weather, miscommunication, and missed targets. Hashizume was less fortunate. During the earlier stop at French frigate Shoals, his aircraft had suffered damage from scraping coral reefs during takeoff. Seawater was leaking into the compartments. Knowing another ocean landing could be fatal, he changed course for WWII Atoll, a much longer journey. Flying low to save fuel, he monitored his instruments nervously. As morning broke, he managed to land his weakened plane safely at the atoll. Soon after, American radio stations began reporting an exaggerated version of the attack. A Los Angeles broadcast claimed that Pearl Harbor had suffered heavy casualties, 30 killed and 70 wounded. Though entirely false, the story spread quickly and reached Tokyo, where it was celebrated as confirmation of success. Encouraged by this misleading report, Japanese commanders ordered another strike. Hashizume, hailed as the returning hero, was chosen to lead the new mission. On March 10, 1942, just days after the failed bombing of Oahu, he took to the air once again. As his plane neared Midway Atoll, American forces, now on high alert, detected the aircraft. A squadron of Brewster Buffalo fighters intercepted him. A short but intense battle followed. Hashizume's aircraft, riddled with bullets, trailed smoke and flame before crashing into the ocean. He did not survive. This marked the end of Operation K, Japan's second attempt to strike Pearl Harbor. Although ambitious, the mission failed and resulted in the death of one of its key pilots. The operation went down in history as the longest bombing raid ever undertaken by unescorted aircraft. It also served as a reminder that the United States would not be caught off guard again.